meeting that we are discussing about the measurement in invisibility, focusing discussion gender equality and how you can promote some activity sites related gender. We have a pleasure to have three outstanding speakers today. I introduce a bit the speakers, but first of all, just give you some guidance about how work this meeting. First of all, you are recording the meeting, so if you're not feel well to show yourself, please remove your camera. We also have an option to listen in Spanish, so set up what the language that you prefer. And we have three panelists that you present to us, and usually you can put some questions or comments at the chat, but in the end you have a round that you can make some questions and comments, so you open the floor for your considerations. Thank you again, and thank you for the speakers to accept our invitation today. So shall we start? For the beginning, I will present our colleague Felix. Felix is head of the media division at Odipo Dev. Odipo Dev is a data studio Kenyan-based, where he leads some data-driven investigation, transforming to compelling public interest in some histories through this data. Today he will present us a project related Kenya and data gender. Please, Felix, feel free to introduce your presentation, and you can also share with us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Larissa. There is an this is being interpreted, right?
I don't know. I cannot see you. I don't know about the colleagues, and neither the presentation yet.
All right, sharing my presentation.
No problem.
I was asking if we have some interpretation for this.
Yes. People can choose their own language, Spanish, English. So you can introduce your presentation in English, and we will have the translation.
Yeah, automatically.
But that Felix are saying is that we can hear the interpreter in the Spanish channel. I think I will try again, but please, Felix, go ahead.
Okay. Great. It's my pleasure. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can see.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Larissa, for the good introduction. I think that's a perfect introduction. I don't need to talk again about myself and what we do. So I'll just straight on go to the my presentation, which is around it's a case study of the gender data that we collected in Kenya around femicide. And I know the theme of this session is around data invisibility. And this particular project is as a classic example of, how we worked around looking for data which was not readily available in a comprehensive form. So how we got this idea of measuring femicide in Kenya is because we kept seeing so many headlines in the news of women getting killed. Almost every single day we see headlines on TV, in the newspapers, and we got curious and wanted to know what's happening, how many women are getting killed, how bad is the problem, who is driving these killings, and to really understand who's getting killed. And when we went to look for the data, we couldn't find the data. The data sets that were, or rather the data that was available that we could find were mostly estimates by perhaps agencies such as UN agencies, and there were other people who were kind of cataloging these cases in social media, but they were not always up to date, and y- still they didn't have like a database that we could go to and get the full data set. When we also looked at the authorities, the Kenyan authorities, the government agencies in the country, such as the Kenya Police, who would have this data in the most comprehensive form, we couldn't find it from them as well. And they were not so open at sharing this data. What they only shared were summaries of homicides, and these were mostly annual estimates. Sorry, annual summaries. So yeah, and this got us thinking. All right, what then do we need to do in this case? We're seeing a lot of headlines. How can we how can we find this data? What's happening, and find the trends and the patterns, to understand the femicide problem and indeed the um, gender-based violence in Kenya. And then that's when the we got the idea of building this database that we called Silencing Women. And perhaps I know I only have 10 minutes, but I later want to show you how the database is looking like. Perhaps actually, let me use this moment to share it. So this, can you see this screen?
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So we created this database that catalogs all women that have been killed in Kenya under a situation that we would be defined as femicide. And we went back many years, all the way back to 2016, getting their details, their names, their age, their relationship, the suspect, and how they were related to the suspect. It's a whole database of more than now, I think more than 600 victims. And that's that is the idea we had, or rather, that was the output of the idea we had. Getting this data that was previously not available, to track femicide cases in Kenya going back in time, and have it as a living database to provide a reference point on femicide in Kenya, and as well as humanizing the victims of femicide. And once we did that, we saw it, we saw our efforts paying off in how it advanced justice for women by illuminating the intensity of the situation of femicide. Like I mentioned, we found more than 500 women who had been killed between 2016 and 2023. Another great insight that surprised us is that 75% of them were getting killed by either their husband or their boyfriend. And that, heartbreakingly enough, we found that it takes an average of 5 years to resolve a murder. Um, at the end, I'm going to show you how we went about getting that data. But just talking about the impacts of what happens when you surface invisible data, we saw this data, the results of our work, powering justice movement. So back in January this year, there were there was a series of femicides that happened, and people took to the streets to protest it. And as they did that, they were carrying along our data with them as as evidence. As you can see, even on these placards, they're quoting our data here. Some of the biggest activists in the country were using our data because we had surfaced something that was previously not available. It demystified myths around women and around how women are getting killed One of the most prevalent myths is that, at least in our country, is that women are chasing after cheap money and they end up with strangers who end up killing them. But our data clearly debunks that. As you can see here, the husband is the leading um was the leading suspect, in those killings, followed by boyfriends. Um, yeah, and that clearly debunks that myth. Another way we saw it advancing justice or revealing the unknown is, it informed social media and political discourses. Our data or our findings were discussed in parliament, as members of parliament debated. It's it has also been used as a reference in media discourses and in media coverage on issues around GBV and femicide. Um, we One of the most impactful things that we saw one of the judges using, or rather quoting our data as she was sentencing one of the suspects, or rather convict, who killed his girlfriend. So that, seeing something as this, such as this, a judge of the High Court referencing our data, shows just how much, invisible this data was, and now it became, something that some of the leading people in the justice front are using it while pronouncing judgment. Um, if we had time, I would play the video, but I think the presentation is shared. Whoever would wish to engage, if they're interested, can do so. Um, yeah, and like I mentioned, this database remains as a living archive and a reference point on femicide in Kenya. That is what happens when you, at least from our learnings, when you surface data that was previously invisible. But then, how did we go about finding this data that is invisible? The government didn't provide this data, still to date doesn't provide. What our workaround plan, as I look behind the scenes at how we did it, is, we went for the media sources because we realized a lot of these cases were reported in the news. So we thought, what if we could just scrape news websites? And we used advanced Google methodology. There could be better methodologies to scrape, but this is what was readily available to us. We used advanced Google search to search news websites for words that are typically used to report femicide. So these, or words like woman, girl, or wife, or girlfriend, and you can see we made it wide. Once we use woman or girl, it's wide enough. There's no there's no femicide reportage that does not, feature one of those. And then we combined that with, the search looked for that one of those words, or and any of these was like killed, kill, murdered, murder, death, died, dead. We really made it wide enough, so that we could surface these articles. And then once we surface these articles, of course, filtering for the dates and the months we are looking for, narrowing it down to specific dates at a time. It was a massive operation, carried out by many people over several months. And then, the results were manually put in a spreadsheet for cleaning and analysis. And then once we had them in the spreadsheet, we extracted those details. Again, very manual process. We looked at the key details we were looking for: the age, the name, the suspect, the age of the victim, the relationship with the suspect, the date of murder, and many other details that we were particularly interested in. And that's how we ended up with a database of over 500 women getting killed between 2016 and 2023. And now 2024, we found other 100 cases. This is critical data that that government authorities don't provide. We've tried to follow through with the criminal investigations department, the police department, but we've not been able to get that. So this is just our workaround to try and understand what's happening. At least that data has given us, much as we know it's not, it may not be the full list because some of the cases are not reported in the media, or we might have missed them in the process of our methodology. But for sure, we know that it is a representative data set that give us the true picture of the trends and patterns. We may not have the full list, but it's a representative. It gives us how the trends and patterns of around femicide in Kenya looks like as we try and find the solutions to this problem. So that is what I wanted to present, and hopefully we can all learn from there. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Felix, for your very necessary work and to show us how you overcoming the problem to collect data. Yes, in the end, you have time to discussion and make comments. Thanks again for the presentation. So now I will pass the floor for Krista Jones Baptista. Krista, thank you to accept our invitation. Just a quick introduction about her. She's Executive Director of Data 2X. She also is a speaker for many places. She is part of a divisory commitment for commitment of principles for data development, which serves for United Nations guidelines relating data in general. So thank you, Krista, again to accept the invitation. Also, Alison, that helped us to do it. Krista, the floor is yours. Just kindly remember, Felix, if you can just withdraw your presentation in case Krista can update her presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak and to be part of this conversation today, and for the introduction. I joined Data 2X 2 years ago. I'm the executive director, and we really work at this intersection of the global kind of data movements around the UN statistical division, country level. We work with country level statisticians, and we also work with civil society organizations, academic institutions, and really try to bring people together around the importance of gender data, to give you a little bit more of context. And my background is more in data products, data ecosystems, data systems and foundations, and digital access. And so really delighted to be here working with all of you in this space. And we talked a little bit about Data 2X, but just to highlight quickly that we're a civil society organization. We're a gender data alliance. We work almost always through partnership with others. So again, really happy to be here with all of you. And the methods that we use to do our work focus on research, convenings, advocacy, and communications. And if we go to the next slide, really looking at our strategy, we really try to connect technical research around gender data with advocacy. We work on improving gender data investments because obviously we need the resources at the country level in order to make sure that gender data can be collected and used over time. Really looking at that availability and use. catalyzing the demand so that people recognize the importance of collecting this, and policymakers know that they can rely on it over time, and looking at those enabling environment factors in order to integrate the gender data into policies. In terms of another way that we think about our work, we have with Open Data Watch developed a data value chain. And I like to highlight this because I think it's really, it's a useful way to think about the different ways that data can be used, whether that's at the collection stage, the publication stage, thinking about uptake and impact. And when you think about the kind of continuum along the value chain, really we're increasing the value of that data for all of our lives, for women and girls' lives, and for a country ecosystems as we make investments all along this kind of data value chain. And so we really try to think about it from that perspective. And feedback is key. So kind of, a lot of the work that we do is actually connecting different parts of the value chain. So looking at the use and reuse of data and how that feeds in then to modifications and kind of the collection process. So digging in a little bit on that. I wanted to share a few examples of projects that we work on and how those might potentially relate to some of the work that all of you might be doing, and happy to answer questions or have more discussion on this. One of our largest programs is the Gender Data Network. In this program, we work with gender data champions in 44 countries across Africa and Asia. And the goal of the program is really to demonstrate this through this transformative power of collaboration, how gender data can be used by country governments and in collaboration with civil society to impact gender policies for greater gender equality, and really start with sharing across the network among the country members, as well as connecting them with other experts and resources, whether that's Tableau or tools that can help them analyze their gender data systems and where investments could be made so that they can advocate for those investments at the country level, and then connecting them with other parts of the civil society that can help monitor, track, and advocate for whether that's investment or release of data, like time use data. And then over time, we've seen that this group has really been able to use the things they're learning in the network in this knowledge exchange, as well as the resources that we make available to them. And then we're looking more and more for ways that we can not only bring them together virtually, but have them attend. So we had 12 members at the UN World Data Forum last month. We're looking for ways that we can partner with others on regional and country level capacity building, and then really connect them in person as much as possible in the regions where they're operating. And so it's a really exciting program that really cuts across sectors as well. So happy to talk more about that or answer questions. Another area where we work quite a lot at the country level is looking at new models of data ownership. So really trying to get at this power imbalance that data often has. And so we're working with funding from Rockefeller on different data exchange models, working with local communities, particularly around data cooperatives, where there may already be cooperatives in existence. How can members benefit from sharing their own data with other interested parties? And then we're also looking at, in the climate space, working with women's organizations on the use and collection of climate-related data. And we've published a handbook on how to build a data cooperative based on our work in countries including India and Tanzania. And we're looking at really unpacking this model a bit more to figure out how it can be scalable and sustainable to other geographies. And then Another program that I'll talk about is some of the work we're doing in intersectionality. And here we're expanding a bit beyond gender data and really thinking about inclusive data approaches. So understanding that each of us brings, as we know, not just our gender as part of our identity, but all these other characteristics, including age, religion, ethnicity, citizenship, that create kind of a complex and really important data that governments need to know for policy and that we all need to be aware of when it comes to our advocacy and use of data work. And so one of the work program that we are undertaking in this space is in collaboration with Open Data Watch, with CGD, the Center for Global Development, and a couple of other organizations. And this data is really essential, I think, as we go forward and expand on inclusive policies. And we're looking at where we can develop not just frameworks, but really advocacy toolkits around this. It's kind of our next phase. And then last kind of area, actually two other areas I'll feature, but this one is really on artificial intelligence and gender data. So we know that a lot of the models that are being built right now by technology organizations are using the existing kind of internet, which is inherently biased and built on not kind of with the goals that we all have in mind of making sure that we're being inclusive, that we are considering different viewpoints. And so we're really looking at why this matters so much around the use of gender data, what insights and guidelines organizations can develop and use when they're implementing AI systems, and then where should we prioritize future research and funding as we're thinking about gender data specifically when it comes to these new methods and tools. And we're, I think, at a really important point in the trajectory of AI where there is still time to have an influence and collaborate. And it is important that we're kind of engaged and being intentional about how we design future tools and how we use AI in our work. And then lastly, I wanted to touch on kind of stick with the theme of this session, really providing a little bit of our initial research on gender-based violence and gender data. And, you know, based on what we've found, we know that that particularly technology-facilitated gender-based violence can have an impact in women's political participation and can really dampen and chill not just engagement, but also political ambitions over time. And we see this happening. There's not just anecdotal information, but we see this happening quite a bit. And we know that in addition, marginalized women politicians are at a higher risk of disinformation, of facing disinformation. And so this ties back into this intersectional approach to gender data. We know that technology-facilitated gender-based violence spikes around elections, which can deter political participation, not just in that election, but potentially in future elections as well. And so it's really critical that we monitor, advocate, and counter gender disinformation with sort of all the tools in our tool. So I'll stop there. And again, just want to thank you for having Data 2X present and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Krista, to present a very interesting projects. You're happy to have you here to present it. Yes, definitely you have time to discussion a bit. So now we're moving for Marisa Miodosky. Marisa is Argentinian political scientist. She has developed the first Buenos Aires City gender equality strategy. She held a grant because of that. So thank you so much, Marisa, to be here. The floor is yours to tell us about your trajectory and everything. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Larisa. Voy a hablar en
Thank you,
español.
Larisa. I will be speaking in Spanish since we have interpretation, and I see that we have many colleagues from Latin America connected today. I didn't bring a PPT today, but I'm going to share with you some links as I speak so that you can do further research or maybe find more information about what I'm going to comment to you. I think that my presentation is very much in line with Krista's and Felix presentations. But I'm going to talk from a different perspective. Today, I'm an advisor of the Statistics and Census Office of the City of Buenos Aires, Statistics Institute. Now, where we develop information, we produce information to inform public policy. And today, I thought about entitling this chat different tips for using data in public policy. Going back to what Krista said, the idea is to contribute information in terms of how statistics offices in Latin America do produce gender-based data. I see in this audience many CSO activists. So I wanted also to listen to the needs to produce relevant data for advocacy purposes. So the idea is to trigger constructive dialogue today. Felix and Krista talked a lot about gender-based data, but that implied binary data, right? Male and female or men and women, which are surveyed under gender by offices, male, female. These are data that are collected through surveys, through censuses, through different tools, but which allow for gender analysis. So we can ask to this data, what can they tell us about the attributes that are allocated to male and female throughout time? I like to share this example when we talk about how data collection with a gender breakdown allows us to analyze gender. And this is work-related accidents. We see more women suffering work-related accidents than men today. And this poses a question, why so? If work-related accidents have to do with dealing with heavy machinery, with working on manufacturing plants, why is it that women are having more work-related accidents? And when you click on the information and you analyze the work sectors, we see that these are women that are covering traditional roles related to women, that is to say, caregiving and education. And they are having more work-related accidents, not because they are managing machinery, but because they suffer accidents because they are being attacked by the people they take care of or they educate. So when we see the gender breakdown of data, we can challenge the information, right? As of late, so for some years now, statistics office of different countries in the region are going beyond binary information, and they are producing data that will capture gender identity, right? This is when the perception of the person is not in line with the gender at birth. And we see this in Argentina. We incorporated this question in the last census. In Uruguay, this question was incorporated in the census last year. In Chile, this question was included in the household survey that is carried out annually, and in other surveys in Peru, for example, or Colombia. And let me give you some information about these categories are created. They are not arbitrarily created, right? Or randomly created. It's not that technocrats get together and list the options for people to feel identified with in terms of their gender. But they come out of dialogue, out of conversation, out of conversations and consultations with groups of activists who, for some years now, are claiming that these categories be included to provide visibility to the different populations in each country. And let me dwell on this. I see that many of you today are part of América Abierta, or we're part of the Open Summit, right? And the data conference that brings together Latin America for some 15 years now. And we held different conversations within the framework of that summit. We talked about the possibility of creating different categories, engaging the different collectives or groups that are part of this gender diversity. And it was at some point a tough dialogue or conversation. So my question to you is, how is it that you think that we can better include them in our information? And let me go back to the case of Argentina, which is the one that I'm most knowledgeable on. The Argentine census incorporated gender identity after a long pathway, after many conversations with different groups that are part of the LGBTQ plus collective. However, there were problems when we had to include those questions in the questionnaires. Those questionnaires were tested in pilot tests, and after that, there were adjustments to be made. So far, this is what the international community is doing in order to innovate, in order to create new ways of collecting this diversity. But of course, that these methodologies may be improved. So my question to all of you today is, what is it that we can do to improve these categories? I don't know if I still have time, but I also wanted to tell you about another experience, in this case, to measure gender-specific data, which is the violence questionnaire that came or was the result of our conversations with civil society. Civil society organizations were claiming or demanding that in addition to femicide data, we should include gender-based violence situations in the city of Buenos Aires. So we engaged in an alliance with an organization that is called ELA, Latin American Team of Justice and Gender, where we were able to design a series of questions to identify violence prevalence for women of age and older, 18 years and older. And this was a very successful alliance. The survey was carried out in excellent conditions, and the CSO worked hand in hand with the Statistics Office in developing the questionnaire, but also in training the persons that were going to the surveyors, let's say, that were going to be working in the city of Buenos Aires. Now we have renewed our alliance with this team, but we have also innovated because we have a specific module to measure an issue that activists had denounced, which is the prevalence of economic and net worth-based violence. This is a type of violence that is invisibilized. But what we try to identify is how women were being deprived of resources, economic resources, or even the possibility of working or having a job. So we included more questions, and also we crossed the information with economic violence cases that had been denounced or reported at the Buenos Aires court of gender violence. So, and then based on this, we carried out thorough interviews to some of these women. So, as a result of this, we were able to publish a document measuring violence prevalence in 2018 and 2023, and it also incorporates qualitative data that came out of these in-depth interviews. I wanted to share with you this specific example of synergy, of articulation, of data production based on the collaboration between the government and civil society. With this, I conclude my presentation. I will share with you links to the presentation and the pathway of the index in order to incorporate this category in the surveys.
Sorry about my voice. To present us about what happened in América Aberta. This was recently an event in Brasilia, Brazil, and also the experience related Buenos Aires and injustice. I just try and summarize a bit what I have been learning from these three presentations to ignite some questions. I guess, I mean, Marisa point out how is important discussion the categories and how also there's a policy making environment to decide which is important or not, even you are collected by census. And it just remind me once you are still struggling not just to summarize in some categories, but also to collect data that Felix show us about his methodology and etc. And finally, we receive several examples from Krista and how you can maybe handle this kind of problem. So my question or my comments or my expectation, you start from her, from Krista, just for example, if you can explain to us about this model that Data4X has been applying in India and Tanzania, that you call like a governance model, how we can data collaborative without like some support from government, sensor or something like that. I mean, the collective can create this data, you know, this database and improve it without the lack of official information or source that you have on this. So this is my first question. Colleagues are here. Please feel free to raise your hands or open the mic and make a question. You'll be happy. This space is for you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Larissa. I'll answer that question and then happy to hear others as well. I have a couple of things I want to highlight. The first is in the handbook, we kind of lay out the steps, but first it's really about finding a cooperative that, you know, already exists, that has data, and doing some capacity strengthening so that they sort of understand the process, then the need and the opportunity, and then connecting that data with, obviously data is not useful. It's like if it's just sitting there. So connecting that data to whether it is other official government sources or academic institutions or private sector, whoever is interested in the data, and then looking at the model, so to speak, kind of the pay model behind it, and how these cooperatives can both benefit from sharing their data, not just financially, but maybe there's other ways they can benefit in terms of planning, tracking, and the processes that they themselves need to do anyway. So kind of creating that holistic model with them is really the key to the data cooperative. But the other thing that your question kind of brings up for me that I'll share is, and I'm curious others may be seeing this as well, I think that there's a much greater openness in the last couple of years to combine data sets between official kind of data sets. And, you know, there's a lot of dialogue right now around citizen-generated data, around using geospatial data. And I think it's a real opportunity for us to engage in these more like really substantive conversations about how to combine these data sets in new ways and to get past the sort of resistance to like, oh, it's not official data, so it's not, going to be relevant. And I think there's a real opportunity there that many of us are involved in, but just to highlight, cooperative data could be another key kind of input into that. It's sort of an organized structure. I think of it as kind of organized citizen-generated data, because you're tapping into these pre-existing kind of cooperatives that already are established, have a set of relationships and a set of counterparts.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you so much. This just pushed me for another question. I share for the another questions, but just to complete it, because maybe it's opportunity to connect the case from Felix and also the thoughts from Marisa, because what you have been seeing, there is a discussion in Latam related use data and how it can impacting some justice system because of killing women or something like that. It's a high, although you have been changed some laws, mainly in Brazil, for example, that my country that I know. But I guess also Marisa gave us some evidence from Chile and other countries. So Felix, if you can explain to us how procedure, how was happen this movement that the Jutsi just use some data evidence from the gender violence, and how you can push it to be part of this like institutional networks, institutional place, how you can increase the advocacy of this data. If you want to use this space to display us, you'll be very useful. And Marisa, please feel free if you want to have some comments about that also. Thank you.
Pardon, Larissa, I didn't quite get your question.
The question is, do you remember the video that you showed for us that you suppose is playing the case that the judge just used the database
yes.
when she mentioned the decision? So that's, I ask you how she just realized that you have this data, how you can do this advocacy with this data.
Okay.
So do you want to display the case or share the video or give us some details?
Okay, I can play the video. Let me play the video. Is that fine?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. Yes, and also if you have some additional comment about it, you can tell us.
Okay. Just a second. So here's the video.
That is every second. That is every second.
Are you able to hear that?
Yes.
Second day, a woman has been brutalized and killed because of her identity. According to statistics from Africa Data Hub, between 2016 and 2023, over 500 women have been killed. The majority of those murdered were below the age of 35 years and were killed by intimate partners or people known to them.
Well, I think I can stop there. So essentially what she was doing is she was setting the stage for that judgment. Basically saying that there has been a trend of women haphazardly getting killed, and acknowledging the seriousness of the situation before she gave the ruling. That's essentially what's happening. So for us, that was a powerful statement coming from her, that data can help push, it can help push a message to some of the critical offices in government. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Felix. And finally, just get another example from Brazil, and maybe you can round this discussion with the colleagues, because the justice system in Brazil just launched a kind of protocol to help the judges and the prosecutor to apply some gender approach through the decision. So my question or comment to learning from you all is how we can at least educate them to work with data gender, because sometimes like policymen or policymakers are not so close to understand about that, how it's procedure, if it like Krista share with us several project, if it was part of the goal of data for X in somehow or some time, and also Marisa that was leading the first X strategy in Buenos Aires. Just explain to us how handle this is struggling sometimes to convince people, learning people, teach people how use this data gender. Thank you.
I can go first. In our experience, it was not so difficult because what we did when we built the gender equality strategy was to start using the data that each agency, each ministry was already using for its own decision-making process. But what we did was through a dialogue process, and this is why I was like emphasizing so much this idea to talk more, not to assume that you are doing things.
Mi amor, no se puede silenciar. Así que te lo dejo acá. Porque tengo...
You are muted, Marisa.
You're muted.
Sorry.
No problem.
My point is to have like good conversations, proactive conversations, and to try to come to agreements, because in the end, people will benefit from this data. And in many cases, it's data that they are already producing, they are already using, but they have not thought about this data from a gender lens. They have not asked questions to the data to see how women, men, or diversities are accessing to the services that agencies are providing differently. And just by asking these questions, you start to realize that you can start making very small adjustments or sometimes very huge reforms in order to guarantee equal access to these rights. But to me, the magical recipe is to have good conversations and to trust, to start to learn how people are thinking, working, and not to have assumptions that they are doing things in a way that is not the right one.
Great, and I agree with all of that. I would add a couple of things. One, we've found some success with a kind of specific integration into official processes. So, for example, we've worked over the years with the International Labor Organization to integrate a light time use module into their broader kind of data collection. So it's taking that kind of systemic approach where you're integrating into processes that already exist, and then making the link between that and policy through a mix of capacity strengthening, knowledge creation. We do a lot of use cases and then publicize those and share those and engage the country level leaders to communicate those themselves in various fora, conferences, meetings, etc. And then also publishing them for kind of more broader public participation. I think that having champions in government and in civil society and creating like partnership has worked. But to kind of the overarching message is we don't know enough about what are the right formulas. And so that's an area that we do a lot of work in. I know that a lot of us are interested in that space. And so I think there's some research and conversations, as Marisa was saying, to be had about how can we really influence policymakers to use gender data? There are use cases, there are examples, there's things that have worked, but we haven't had, I think, as much success as we all feel like we could now that there's even the more data that we have now, let's say, than 10 years ago.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Marisa. So I don't know if you have any question or comment. I don't want to monopolize here. If not, I just summarize last thoughts about what you have for the next year. Hope you can come back with us then for the next agenda to discuss another lens or another view related agenda and data. From January, you have, as usual, our initial meeting that you are discussing this agenda. So I'm definitely invite you to come and suggest some topics that we cover for each monthly for the next year. Thank you so much again, Krista, Marisa, and Felix, to be here today and to finalize this work year. I'm very happy, and thank you, Nati, Mercedes, and Hannah to give me this space to learn from you and learning from these colleagues every month here. And thank you for all the community. So if you want to say some words, feel free, Nati and colleagues, and thank you so much.
No, thanks. I just wanted to thank everybody who joined today. Thank you to our amazing speakers. We know December is a complicated month for everybody wrapping up budgets and reports, but very glad that everybody's here. And as Larissa said, we will find all the implementation working group members next year for a co-creation of our yearly agenda. Hope to see you everybody soon and have great holidays.
Good holidays. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.